So we've got our kick in there now. We might need to tweak it a little bit later on depending on how it sounds with the rest of the track, but we don't know that yet. So we're just going to leave it for now, and then we might have to revisit it a little bit later on. Now, that's one of the great things about using the kick synthesizer. There's so many different parameters that you can do to make it fit better with your track. Now, you might be expecting us to do the rest of the drums now, go on and do the claps and the hats and things like that. But no, we're not going to do that today. We're going to concentrate on something different. Now, because we're trying to create that filtered house kind of sound, we really need to focus on 3 key sounds within this track. We need a really good kick, we need a great bass, and we need to find an awesome hook for this track. Now, we already have the kick in there, and the bass we're probably going to have to match with whatever our hook is. So we really need to find this sample and find a really good one. Now, we can go to a number of different sources for this sample. We could sample it from an old record or an old existing track, but we might have copyright issues if we were trying to do that. If we're trying to clear it to release the track, we're going to have some issues. You might find an amazing sample, but you might not be able to get clearance from that record label. So one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to have a look at sample libraries and trying to find a sample within there that we can use. Now, obviously, sample libraries allow us to use things royalty-free, so we don't have to pay any license or anything else like that. We pay for the sample, and then we can use it however we want to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into a French and disco house sample pack. I will just say that all of these sample packs I'm using in this video are available from the sonicacademy.com website. You can go on there and purchase any of these sample packs, and some of these are just fantastic. I was going through some of these disco house packs earlier, and they've got some really great samples in there. And in fact, you wouldn't even miss sampling from an old record. You've got ones in here that are already cleared, you can just use straight within your tracks. So let's go through some of these loops and see what they sound like. As I say, this is the French and Disco House 2 pack. Let's have a listen to some of these samples. Really love that piano sound. That's amazing. I don't think that's quite the vibe we want to go for with this, but I'm making a mental note to use that later. I really love that one. That's got a real disco-y kind of feel to it. As you can hear, these samples are fantastic, and the fact that we don't have to pay any royalties on them, we can just use them straight within our tracks, is an amazing thing. So I'm going to use this sample. I think this sample is going to work really nicely. Just going to drag and drop it on, and then I'm just going to drag out the end of it just to loop it up. So we've got it over the whole length of our kick. See how it sounds. See, that already sounds kind of cool. I love that. I'd say we were looking for a kick that really kind of, I call it a flat kick. It's this kind of real snappy kind of kick. It's got weight, but it doesn't last too long. It's just got that thump, and it kind of works really well with this kind of disco house, filtered house kind of sound. Now, let's solo this disco sample and start doing some processing on it. So first thing I'm going to do is, quite obviously, I'm going to roll a little bit of the bottom end off. Now, I've already got an EQ8 on here. As I say, I've set this up as a preset. Whenever I add a new audio channel, it comes up with the EQ8. So I've got the EQ8 on there. I'm just going to roll a bit of the bottom end out. Now, if you're using a disco sample for this kind of music, then you kind of got to make this decision right now as to whether you want to use the bass on this disco sample or not. So you might want to use the bass on this disco sample throughout your whole track and not actually have a separate bass instrument. Or you might want to just use the top end of this disco loop and then recreate the bass in a different way. Now, if you've got a really good bass line within this sample, then yeah, you could use it and that would probably work really well. Within this one, I'm not sure on the actual the bass line. It's a more of a rumble. It's not like a real bass line. I want something a bit more driving. So I think in this case, we're going to roll off the bottom end. So again, I'm just going to take the first parameter here and just roll off the bottom end a bit. So we still got a little bit of that kind of, you can hear the existing bass element within there, but it's not going to interfere with any of our main bass that we're going to be playing a bit later on. So yeah, that kind of works for me. Next thing I might put in there is I might just put in an auto filter actually. So under audio effects, I'm going to go to auto filter. And this, I'm just really going to play around with this and see what we can do with it a bit later on. Now, the whole part of this kind of filtered disco kind of sound is taking disco samples and then filtering them, obviously. That's kind of what it's all about. And this auto filter, on its default settings, basically is a low pass filter, which allows us to kind of cut out some of those highs and make it sound kind of cool. And one of the biggest characteristic of this kind of disco filtered kind of sound is using the resonance within a filter like this to kind of give it a bit more character. So if you can hear me when I'm playing this, I'll just decrease the frequency. So you'll hear the fact that I'm cutting out some of those high ends. But without much resonance, it hasn't got much character. Now, if I do the same thing, but up the resonance a bit, so as you can hear, that resonance just gives it that kind of, that filtered house kind of character. That's kind of what a lot of filtered house kind of did back in the day. Adjusting the resonance is kind of how you kind of create that effect. Now you need to be really kind of careful with the resonance, depending on what filter you're kind of, you're swooping through here. That obviously we've got a peak going on here within the kind of EQ. And depending on what that frequency is, that could really, really hurt your ears. And it can be a very uncomfortable, nasty experience to be hearing certain frequencies at such kind of volumes and isolated. It can be really, it's not a great sound. So you need to be kind of really careful with the resonance. So just play with it and kind of maybe dial it in and see how much you want to use, and then just bring it back a little bit before you actually kind of start doing it, just in case. We all tend to overdo things when we kind of put them on first off. So yeah, we got this auto filter in there, and I think a bit later on we'll probably be using this, or we might be automating this, maybe in a breakdown or whatever, but we might be using that quite a bit. Now, one of the main characteristics of that kind of filtered house sound is how the disco loop and the bass really pumps along with the kick drum. Now, this is done through rather extreme sidechain compression, and that's what we're going to focus on next. So I'm going to drag and drop the standard Ableton compressor onto this disco sample, and we're going to start setting that up. Now, if you've watched any music production videos or done any music production courses, you probably will have touched upon sidechaining before. And mainly it's done as a tool. It's so that usually the bass can avoid the kick and you're not kind of muddying up the lower frequencies. But today we're going to do it as more of an effect. So it's something you're really going to hear. It's something that's done to the extreme, and that is kind of what creates the effect. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the compressor into sidechain mode. So I'm going to click the arrow button here, and that will then bring up the panel, the sidechain panel. Now, if I click the sidechain button, it will then put it in sidechain mode, and I can choose which channel I want it to duck. So in this case, I want it to duck the kick. Now, at the moment, this is not going to do anything. This is not going to sound any different because I haven't started adjusting it yet. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen back to both the disco loop and the kick loop together, and I'm going to adjust the threshold here. So I'm going to bring that down. And as I start bringing it down, you'll start hearing that pumping effect. So first off, I'm going to unsolo that disco loop, and then I'm going to start it playing. So as you can see with this is the gain reduction. Every time that kick hits, it just pushes everything down. So that is kind of what is creating the pumping effect. As soon as that kick stops, everything comes back up again. And that's kind of what that sidechain compression is doing. It's quite simple once you kind of get it on there and you start playing around with it. Now we can adjust some of the other parameters in here to kind of give it maybe a more subtle effect or more extreme effect, and we can just play around with that. For example, the release here is how quickly it comes back in and out again. So we can start tweaking this. It might make it better, it might not, but we can do it just by playing around. So I think the standard release was pretty much almost there. I've just taken it down a little bit, but as you saw, as I increased the release, it just made it a bit more subtle, which wasn't what you're going for at all. And if I brought it all the way back to like no release, it was kind of sounding a bit crunchy and a bit raw, which again is if that's the kind of sound you're after, then it might work. But I've just rolled it back a bit. So it's almost near the standard, but just a little bit quicker, just a tiny bit quicker. Not I think it makes too much difference, but you'll hear it when you're kind of listening back to it. So that's the kind of compressor all set up. So that's kind of got that pumping sound going on. And we're actually probably going to end up copying this compressor and putting it onto our bass and other elements as we go along, because this is the basis for our side chaining in the track. So we're probably going to use this again.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content. And if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.